Hi, I'm Mike from Pinkbike, and today we're going to go over some quick tips on how to improve your wet weather riding experience. We're going to go over some gear, some riding techniques, as well as just general mental preparedness for enjoying the time in the rain. So one of the best accessories that you can get for wet weather riding is a fender. It doesn't need to be anything fancy. You can even make one at home out of a soda bottle, some kind of plastic, but basically it goes right here, zip ties to the fork, and it's going to help keep that spray from hitting you in the face. The next thing to do is make sure you have metallic brake pads. There's two different kinds. Most brakes these days come with organic, but what happens is when it rains, these organic pads, they just don't cut it. So what you want, metallic pads. Metallic's the way to go. Improves your braking performance in the wet. It's also going to be more consistent. So when it's wet and muddy outside, those semi-slick or low profile tires that you use in the summertime, they're just not going to cut it. Lots of different options out there. Right here is a specialized hillbilly. You can see this has a tall side knobs, tall center knobs, and pretty open spacing. It allows the mud to get flung away and for those tires to just really dig into the ground. I like to run a more aggressive tire up front, and even in the winter, sometimes a little less aggressive tire in the rear. In addition to going with a more aggressive tread, you also want to have a tire with a softer, stickier compound. That's going to help you have traction on the roots and the wet rocks that you're going to encounter. Tire pressures are also something to consider as well. Some riders prefer to drop a couple pounds here or there. Say you typically run 25 pounds in the back, you can try 23, just 2 pounds. It doesn't have to be extreme, but just that little bit can make a difference out on the trail. And that lower pressure is going to let your tire just conform to the roots and rocks, and it gives it more traction, just really grabs onto the ground rather than bouncing around and getting knocked offline. Another thing with a bike that you might want to consider is trying flat pedals. If you're clipping in all summer, it's a good time to try to mix it up and try something new. One of the advantages of flat pedals, besides helping you refine your technique, is that when it's really wet and mucky, there's nothing to clog up. Put your foot on there, it's going to be on the pedal. Same thing, you're going around a corner, it's getting a little slidey, you can stick a foot out a lot easier. She's greasy. So greasy, I don't know if that'll work. So you've got that front fender on, but that's not going to be enough to keep all of the mud and grit out of your eyes. So eye protection is definitely highly recommended, especially when you're going downhill. Either glasses, goggles, there's lots of options. You don't need to go too crazy with the price, especially with glasses. These cost $2 American dollars at the hardware store, and because they're going to get just totally covered with mud, it's about all you really need to spend for that type of thing. The one thing you do get if you spend a little more money is better anti-fog properties. If you want to have these on the whole time, these will fog up. There's just no real coating or anything. So a nicer lens on the more expensive ones. You just need to balance. Goggles, you can get spend a little bit more, a little more venting. They'll be less likely to fog up, and the extended coverage is nice when it's really wet out. Before buying goggles, it's worth checking to see how much a replacement lens costs. Some are pretty inexpensive, other ones fairly expensive, even for the clear lens, so something to consider. One trick that I've picked up for wet weather riding is bringing an extra pair of gloves. When it's a little bit cold out, it's say too cold to go without any gloves in the climb, I'll wear one pair, get to the top, pull the fresh pair out of my pocket, put those on for the descent. That way, dry hands, at least for the beginning of your ride. There are some waterproof options out there. It's just going to really depend on the temperature and what your tolerance is. For me, I typically don't go with a waterproof glove. I really still like as thin a glove as possible, but those dry gloves for the descent are really nice to have. Riding in wet weather, it does require a little bit different apparel than you might typically wear in the summer, obviously. A lot of this is going to depend on your location. Some areas when it's rainy, it's also really cold, maybe close to freezing. Other areas, it's warmer, warm rain, so that's really going to determine what you're going to wear. A nice wicking base layer with a waterproof, breathable outer, that's going to be important to invest in. You don't need to go too crazy. Again, there's a huge range of prices, but just something that has some nice vents and is going to keep the rain off you. There's also waterproof shorts or pants. Again, that'll depend on where you're riding, but you can always go to your local shop and see what they recommend. As far as footwear goes, same thing. There's shoe covers. Some people wear waterproof socks or even just wool socks just to help your feet stay warm and dry as long as possible. One thing to consider when it's this nasty out, it's really pouring down rain, you need to adjust your expectations before heading out on a ride. You're not going to be setting any Strava records. You're just not going to be probably even going out for the same amount of time as you would on a nice, beautiful sunny day. So just adjust accordingly. Pick a trail that you know drains well, isn't going to be full of standing water hopefully, and that can actually withstand some mountain bike traffic when it's wet. You can't ride in the wet in all areas. Where we are right now in the Pacific Northwest, it's like this a good portion of the year. And these trails are designed with wet weather riding in mind, but if you live in a desert area, somewhere where the trails just turn to sticky, gloppy clay, it's best to just wait for better weather before you head out and ride. It's going to be cold, wet, slippery, and just trickier in general to accomplish what you normally do. Even the easier trails are going to seem a little bit harder. All right, well, so you can hear by the brakes, it's going to be a pretty wet one out here today. The way that this trail we picked in particular, chose it because it's got a pretty consistent grade besides this flat part here, and it tends to drain a lot better than the other trails in this area. So going to be pretty wet, pretty sloppy, but it should be better draining and less likely to find huge puddles and big, super muddy sections. So again, just choose the trails that you ride accordingly and have fun. What we have coming up here on the trail is a section of off-camber wet roots, and that's going to be the trickiest things you'll typically encounter when it's this nasty out. With roots, the key is to hit them as straight as possible. What happens is as soon as you get a little angle, your tires are going to want to slide. They're going to want to push you off the trail or into a tree, something like that. So think light thoughts. You want to try to stay light on your bike. You don't want to do any sudden movements or any drastic direction changes. You can see it doesn't really get much wetter than this. We're in the middle of a pretty good downpour. We had some nice hail a moment ago, and the stream has decided to go right down the trail. One thing to remember, your grip is actually going to be where the water's going. The water is going to kind of flush that mud away, and you can kind of almost follow that line of least resistance. When it's dry in summertime, the way the water flows is the fastest way down the trail. You're going to kind of do the same thing right now. You're really going to want to pay attention to your braking points. Your brakes aren't going to be as powerful in the wet. If you don't brake soon enough, you could end up blowing a turn, coming in with too much speed, and you don't want that. You need to plan ahead of time. You need to use your brakes a little earlier and know that they're not going to come on quite as strong. Your hands are going to be cold, the pads are wet, so there's going to be a little bit of delay in braking time. So in addition to those wet roots that you're going to encounter on the trail, you're also going to find plenty of wet rocks. Slippery rock faces, sometimes they'll even cover a little bit of mud, and it can be difficult to maintain traction. One thing you want to try to keep in mind is your braking. Again, pretty important. Too much rear brake and that back end is going to fishtail a bunch, too much front, and you're going to wash that out. And if they do slide, try not to panic. Just try to keep in control, keep looking ahead. Have your exit points planned. That's where looking ahead really helps, knowing what's after the rock. But if you can keep that bike straight on the rock, you've got a nice patch of dirt or straightaway afterwards, it's going to be a lot easier to exit. All right, we finished the ride, wet, muddy, a little bit cold. One thing you don't want to forget, it seems simple, but having a spare change of clothes and a towel for the ride home is going to make all the difference. Get that on, warm and dry, head back home, take care of your bike, and dry out your clothing. So when it's this wet out, you can see, riding big tires, soft ground, it can tear up the trails a little bit. So one thing that's even better than riding in the rain like this is building some trails. Contact your local trail organization, get your work boots on, head out and give back. That's really the best thing to do when it's super wet out, and it's going to give you some good trail karma, some good points for when it is nice and sunny. You can enjoy your handiwork. We've gone over some wet weather riding tips, some bike setup tricks, and just some general know-how that'll hopefully help your time in the rainy weather be as enjoyable as possible. Don't forget to subscribe to Pinkbike's YouTube channel and check out all of our other videos as well.